Welcome into Jungle Tales, a Pirate Baseball podcast. On deck for East Carolina is the Conway Regional. The Pirates are going to be matched up with the Florida Gators Friday at noon. You also have Coastal Carolina and Fairfield there in Conway. And, the Pirates are making their 7th straight NCAA Regional, and the Gators in their 17th straight under Kevin O'Sullivan right now. To preview that matchup as well as the regional as a whole, I'm very excited to be joined by former Florida Gators pitcher and current play-by-play voice, Jeff Cardozo. Jeff, we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, of course. Good morning. That intro had me fired up. I'd rather go play at your place. Field looks sweet. Never gotten to go there either.
Yeah, appreciate the kind words. We're definitely very blessed at East Carolina to have an excellent atmosphere with Clark LeClaire Stadium in the jungle. And that's something that over the last decade or so under Cliff Godwin, and we've certainly had a proud tradition before that, but with the way the game has grown in regards to coverage on ESPN, hosting regionals, and even a super regional against Texas, the nation has been able to become aware of what we've known as Pirate fans. But before we dive into this team specifically, just tell us a little about your background. You played for the Gators at the same time as East Carolina head coach Cliff Godwin was playing for the Pirates back in the late 90s and early 2000s. You had an awful lot of success during your time in the blue and orange.
Yeah, it was it was great. Fun times. You look back, and certainly getting to be a part of college baseball, you kind of wish that it would have been the same atmosphere like you were just talking about with the coverage and the fans and everything that's going on. But still some of those guys are my best friends to this day. They're in your weddings, and you're hanging out with them all the time, and we go on golf trips, and I think we still stay in touch quite a bit. And there were 4 or 5 big leaguers on those early teams, so it was a lot of fun just to be around that all, and then getting to experience all the things that we got to do. And I think from my perspective, it's been pretty unique then getting to jump right into the broadcast side of it all. I tore up my shoulder, so that ended the playing days, but just to see the growth of college baseball in general, certainly the SEC. I think even for our ballpark back when I was playing, it was one of the better ones in the league, and then it got passed up by a whole bunch of them. So we've got to build a new ballpark 4 or 5 years ago, and certainly the rest of the SEC has been able to do that. But yeah, it's special. It's finally fun to see the national coverage that it deserves. And I often tell people that it's probably equivalent to a high A or something like that, and even to a certain extent, some of these stadiums like you're playing AA baseball. It's pretty cool to be around.
One of the great teams in 2001, your senior season, was the Tennessee Volunteers. And not to deviate too much from the topics that we wanted to keep at front and center today, but when I saw that you finished your career up in 2001, I had to ask you this because East Carolina came up just shy of Omaha, lost, I think it was 13-10 and 16-3 to the Tennessee Volunteers. Chris Burke, such a prominent name in the college baseball world. What are your memories of that Volunteers team?
Yeah, really good team. It's interesting you bring up Berkey because, back then he was obviously a really good player, SEC Player of the Year. I couldn't get that dude out, and I couldn't stand the guy. And I'm like, man, who's this little dude that just, destroys everybody? And then, of course, he gets to go to the Astros, and I'm a big Braves fan growing up. He hits the extra inning home run to beat the Braves in the playoffs, and I'm like, man, here's this Burke guy again. I can't stand this dude. And then obviously in the broadcast world, he's become a great friend. We often play golf together in the different stops that we get to go around. And, he's kind of that same guy too. He's very meticulous. He'll talk a lot of trash, but he loves college baseball. Just another great ambassador for all of it. But it is funny how that stuff works. You have an appearance or, just kind of an image of how a guy is, or you just can't stand him. And then you meet him, and then one of the greatest dudes in the world. So, yeah, those were a lot of good battles over the years, with many different guys. I think that's a unique part about getting to look back and, all these guys I played with or against that ended up making the big leagues. And, I think that's where a little bit of a regret, because my shoulder went bad and, the couple of surgeries didn't really fix it, just to never get that opportunity. But I still think being around the game and, getting to go to the World Series all the time like I do with the Gators, it makes up for it, certainly.
Bringing this back to the Gators and Kevin O'Sullivan. In 2002, I had gone to watch East Carolina play down at Clemson. Jack Leggett and the Tigers, of course, had it rolling. You had Tim Corbin on that staff, Kevin O'Sullivan, Eric Bakich, and now look what all those gentlemen have accomplished. And Sully, like I mentioned in the open, 17 straight regionals, a national title in 2017, I believe it was, and has come close a few other times. Talk about the consistency that he brought to an already proud Florida program.
Yeah, I think that's what, at the time, Jeremy Foley was the athletic director, and that was always the vision. Because even back when I was playing, Andy Lopez was the coach, and you go to Omaha in 96 and 98, but we don't make a regional in 99. A bunch of people got hurt. 2000, we were one game away from getting to Omaha again, and then the next year don't make it. And then Pat McMahon gets hired, and then you go to a couple of regionals. You play for a national title in 2005 against Texas, lose that. But then you don't make a regional in 06 and 07. So I think it was just like, hey, Florida's a good enough program to consistently be in regionals. And then obviously Sully gets hired there in 2008, and Florida hasn't missed a regional ever since. And, certainly that was in jeopardy this year, getting off to the 1-11 start in the league. But I think it shows you how good of a coach he really is. I still think times are changing. You got to maybe now adapt to what he does, because you mentioned Tim Corbin. I think him and Corbin, even once NIL started, it was still, hey, we've always gotten the best freshmen in the country. We develop them, a couple will play, but then by their sophomore and junior years, we've got better players than everybody else. But now with the transfer portal, you can go get old pretty quickly. So I think Sully's had to adapt. I think Corbin's had to adapt. I mean, look at even Dave Van Horn. Look at Mike Bianco. He went out, hit the portal. So I think a lot of these veteran coaches that have always had success and, won a national title, although Van Horn hasn't yet. But, they finally are understanding what this day and age of college baseball is. But I think it just showed you this year how good of a coach Sully, the rest of this staff is. There was never any panic. I think there was always just that hope that these guys would figure it out at a certain point. Those guys worked really hard from a coaching standpoint. And then Florida won the last 6 series of the year. And one was against Arkansas and one was against Texas. So they figured it out despite a whole bunch of injuries. But I think that's because of, the process and what these guys have been through.
Yeah, they certainly have done just that. That's something that jumped out to me. I guess what a 16-2 start, lost 9 out of 11. Then, as you mentioned just a moment ago, having won or did win 6 straight SEC series, including those against top 3 seeds, Texas and Arkansas, with the one against the Longhorns coming in Austin at Disch-Falk Field. And, just this league as a whole, from someone who's there as yourself for each and every game, 13 SEC teams and then 8 hosts. Tell us about the grind that is SEC baseball.
Yeah, it's the perfect word. I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's a 10-weekend grind. And, fortunately we were able to play Missouri this year, and they weren't very good. So that helps. But, it's a crapshoot. I mean, normally even those tougher teams, especially if you go on the road, it's really tough. I mean, Missouri swept us last year on the road, and that never happens, yet Florida ended up making Omaha. So I think that just shows you how hard it really is. You've got guys that are going to be in the big leagues all over the place. I mean, look at LSU, look at Wyatt Langford just from a couple of years ago from our team, what Caglione has been able to do. I mean, you're talking about big time atmospheres and environments, and just the arms are ridiculous now. I mean, everybody's running out. You sit there and just watch the SEC tournament, and, I would probably say consistently about 70% of the arms are throwing at least 95. And you're just like sitting there in awe of like, holy smokes, what's going on with these guys? But, I think the guys love it. They enjoy it. They welcome it. But it does. It wears you out. I mean, there's a few games where you kind of get into it and, you're sweating, even though I'm just sitting there in a chair as a broadcaster, you're like sweating to death by the end of it, just because there's so many ups and downs and back and forth and bumps and roads. And every game means so much to try to become a host, or certainly a national seed, or all that kind of stuff. So it is a grind for sure. But I think it helps you now towards the end of the year, and we certainly saw that last year.
No doubt. In the Gators run to Omaha a year ago, you mentioned the top flight arms. one of the things that definitely jumps off the page to me, looking over the Florida numbers in 482 innings, 621 strikeouts, names like Liam Peterson, Aiden King come to mind. Tell us about the Gators rotation and, what we can expect to see from some of those guys. If you know who's going to get the ball on Friday against East Carolina, and then we'll dive into the bullpen.
Sure, yeah, and I wouldn't expect Sully to throw off. I mean, there's no reason to do that. I mean, East Carolina is obviously legit and has some great arms as well. So I think you probably see Florida's Friday night guy, which is Liam Peterson. It's a guy that I think some of the publications, D1 Baseball, Baseball America, think that he might be the top arm in the draft next year. Right-hander, 97, 98 at times. He's factored in a changeup this year, which has been really good. Slider's been good. He's developed kind of more of a 12-6 breaking ball. So he's got 4 different pitches, probably stick with 3 of them throughout the game, but it's a lot of hard stuff. And, I think the thing with Liam, when he locates, he's unhittable, but there are times too where he'll leave balls out over the plate and, that'll get hit around a little bit. So we'll see what happens there, but he's certainly a very talented arm. And then Aiden King could be the other option, a freshman that was pretty tremendous this year. And, I think, we look at a lot of different pitchers and can you handle the moment as freshmen? Can you understand what it takes to pitch at this level? And King went up to Knoxville and threw 6 innings against the reigning national champs, only gave up 1 run. And then he pitched against Texas, threw 7 shutout innings in Austin in their place. So he's a bulldog. He doesn't give a crap, nothing phases him. He's got that mindset you need to attack hitters and go after them. 92, 93 roughly. Nice little splitty that he'll feature, but just command on both sides of the plate. So 2 really front end guys. And then we've got a third guy in Pierce Capola, who's been injured the last couple of years, but he's a big 6'8" lefty that he comes out and, he could give you 3 or 4 innings. He's been hurt a majority of the year, just like he was last year. So he's battled a lot of injuries, but, a guy that can eat up some innings. And certainly, as you need a lot of arms in a regional to get through. And, we'll see if Florida can be able to do that.
Jake Clemente, 7 saves across 20 appearances. I noticed he also had 5 starts to his name, 50 2/3 innings, and opponents are hitting just 176 against him.
Yeah, he, this is a guy that went to the Cape Cod League last year. He was actually a Cape All-Star up there. So he came back and had every intention of being the Sunday starter this year. And he was good, but, he would only last about 4 innings. And then you could tell he sort of got tired and, getting into the 5th, he would start to give up some runs. So the last couple of years, Sully has always had a guy that kind of was a pseudo starter that he's turned into a reliever. And Sully likes to use guys at the back end in multiple innings. You mentioned the 2017 national title. We had a guy like Michael Byrne that did the exact same thing. He wanted to be a starter, but he was just better out of the bullpen. I think Clemente's found his home there. He's, again, another one of those guys with the right mentality. So he'll come, and I think the recipe for success during these last 6 weeks and winning is Clemente can come in and pitch maybe the 7th, 8th, or 9th on Friday, and then come back on Sunday and pitch the 8th or 9th. So this is a guy that throws multiple innings, comes at you with a fastball that's 96, 97, nice little breaking ball. It's really just a 2-pitch mix, but he locates well. And, there's some giddy up on that fastball that misses a lot of bats. So that's kind of been what it is. If you can get 6 or so out of Peterson to start the game and Florida has the lead, I think he would bring in Clemente to get you the final 9 outs. And certainly in a regional when everything's on the line and your season's on the line, then you might see that guy multiple times as much as his arm can handle it.
In addition to Clemente, tell us about some other arms out of that Gators pen that fans should be aware of.
Yeah, I think another one is Luke McNeely, a kid out of Georgia. Really good breaking ball. Kind of the same mindset as all these other guys. Like when he's on, he's been unhittable. He's been really, really lights out. He's got more appearances than anybody out of that Gator bullpen. Really nasty slider. Fastball's good, mid 90s at times. So you'll probably see him, especially in a high leverage situation. And then, to be honest with you, the rest are freshmen. And it's why Florida struggled early on, because it was about 5 or 6 freshman arms that didn't know what they were doing, didn't know how to pitch at this level. And they have all of a sudden figured it out. So you'll never see really any of those guys more than about an inning or so. Florida doesn't have a lot of lefties out of the bullpen, so it's a majority of righties that he'll just try to match up with if it's a lefty, they'll bring in a guy with a good changeup and Christian Rodriguez, or if it's a good right-handed bat in a big situation, bring in, Jackson Barberi, another freshman like that. So just a lot of youngsters. And I think that's the question. Can they handle a situation like this in a rowdy environment with the season on the line? I would think the SEC prepared them for that, but I guess you never know until you step over that white line.
Turning to the lineup, you have Colby Shelton, 377, 7 bombs, 19 doubles, I believe a team high. A familiar name for Pirate fans, Bobby Boser, and then also Brody Donay. And you tell us about those guys, and then also some other names in the Gators lineup that we should be aware of.
Sure, yeah. Boser's the kind of the catalyst. He was moved to the leadoff spot. We're about halfway through the SEC season, and the Gators have gotten really good ever since then. A guy that hits to both sides of the field, second in home runs, I think more ribbies than anybody else on the team. Guy that's going to hit in the 2-hole as a freshman, really good freshman in Brendan Lawson. But, I think like a lot of freshman hitters, you can see him sort of wear down towards the end of the year. Heading into the SEC tournament, he was in the biggest slump that he's been in. So maybe a week and a half off will rejuvenate him a little bit, but a really good hitter in the 2-hole. And then you've got some veterans after that. You mentioned Shelton. Shelton's missed the last 4 weeks with a hamate bone injury. So the projection is to have him back for the regional here. So hopefully all is good there. I mean, he started swinging a bat last week at the end of the SEC tournament. So that's been a big bat out of the lineup. And if you can get him back, not only in the lineup, but to shore up the shortstop position, Gators have had to move some guys and they're sort of playing out of position. So if you can get Boser back over to third, Shelton back to shortstop, then, that's better. Brody Donay is a guy that, can run into a ball and hit a whole bunch of home runs, especially in this smaller ballpark that, you got to certainly be out. And he's got more opposite field homers than anybody in the country. I think he's hit 9. 9 of his 17 homers have been opposite field. So guy that can hit to all fields with a lot of power. And then Ty Evans, guy in Omaha a couple of years ago, he had 5 homers in the College World Series. So that's more than anybody's ever hit in the history of the College World Series. So there's some bats there, but Ty's struggled this year. He went through a stretch of 45 days where he only had driven in 1 run, and then he got hurt and he was out of the lineup. And now that he's come back, he's hit 4 homers down the stretch. So maybe he's getting hot at the right time. And then the bottom part of the order is, I think that's what Sully likes about this order. It's deep, not a pop down there, but guys that'll get on base and they'll kind of single to death. They'll play a little small ball at the bottom part of the order. And then, I think the big difference from this year's team to many in the past is Florida actually runs the bases pretty well. They only had 43 stolen bases last year, and they've more than doubled that this year. And that's probably because of that bottom part of the order and just playing a different style of baseball. So it's a chance to be a really deep lineup, 1 through 9. I think there's certainly some guys that are going through some rough patches right now, but I guess we'll see when it gets out there.
How have the Gators fared, Jeff, against lefties? Ethan Norby will get the ball for ECU, and Ethan, as I'm sure you're aware of, as you've prepped for this game, and you perhaps saw it on social media back when it happened against Coastal Carolina. The number 13 overall seed in this tournament. He struck out 19, and just had an unbelievable night and was National Pitcher of the Week.
Yeah, it's I think a little scary for Florida, and probably certainly good for your guys. It's just, I think that's the one, because there's so many power arms in the SEC. Florida's used to seeing that. And even when they're playing inter squads and stuff, all their guys are power arms. So I think over the years, and I remember even back when I played, going back to that, we faced a guy in 2000 that had only thrown 13 innings all year from San Jose State. And Florida was, or San Jose State was desperate. They had to just throw a guy out there and thought he'd throw him for 2 or 3 innings, but he just thumbed it up there from the left side, kept everybody off balance. And it's almost been like a hex on Florida baseball for the last 25 years. So, it's sometimes tough handling, different look and different arms. And, I guess the good part is now, if you're a Gator fan, certainly is, there's so much video now, you can kind of prepare and see and try to understand what a guy's doing, but there's nothing like seeing it for real. So, I think there's certainly a worry, and, Gators are going to have a good approach at the plate to be able to handle something like that.
One of the staples of Ethan Norby is how fast he likes to work.
Mm-hmm.
And that that's become more and more of a thing, which is definitely has many benefits. But that's something that I'm very intrigued to see early on Friday. The Gators batters, and how that's working. Against Ethan Norby, and how fast of a pace he likes to hold.
Yeah, I think the good thing is the Gators like to do the same thing. There's 4 or 5 guys that just like to get it and go. I mean, Clemente, who you mentioned, is one of those guys. I mean, he's basically waiting on the rubber for the dude to get in the box, and he's going to be coming right at you. So I think the Gators will be used to something like that, and I guess that's good for a broadcaster, right? We don't have to have like a 4-hour game. It'll be nice and quick if everybody's just getting it and going.
Final couple things for you. Taking a look at the Gators defensively, I see a 975 fielding percentage, but give us a glimpse behind the scenes for those who haven't seen the Gators play a lot this year. What can we expect from a defensive standpoint? I know there have been a few injuries, and you referenced the injury to shortstop Shelton. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, I think that was certainly a big one to have to move some guys around. The second baseman Justin Nato got hurt for about a week, so they actually had to take the left fielder Blake Sear and put him at second base, and that was a cluster. So that didn't work out really well. And the Gators made a lot of errors during that time. They were putting another guy at third and Landon Stripling when Bozer had to go to short when Shelton got out, and they actually tried to bring Lawson over from first over to third. So I think they've finally gotten to a point where they've solidified the defense. But maybe the biggest loss is the catcher, Luke Heyman. He had thrown out more runners than anybody in the SEC, but he got hit on the forearm in the last weekend of the regular season. So he's out. And that was a guy that was hitting 3-hole. He caught every single inning in SEC play. So now Brody Donay's got to go back there and catch. And he's got a great arm, but not nearly the catcher that Heyman was, especially, and just catching and framing pitches and doing different things. So that was a big loss as well. So, I mean, there's been a lot of years when Sully's been able to make the College World Series because they could pitch and play defense. This isn't one of the better defensive teams, but Florida does have a center fielder that can run down a lot of balls. So that's where you try to do. Right field's a little suspect with Evans at times. So they put another guy out there in Ashton Wilson and DH'd Evans. So, I think that's the one thing that maybe teams can take advantage of where Florida nearly hasn't been as good in the last couple of years on the 2 runs to Omaha.
Kevin Schnall at Coastal Carolina taking over for the legend Gary Gilmore, who led the Chanticleers to a national title within the last decade. And the Chanticleers 23-3 for their starting pitchers. Tell us what you've learned about Coastal and the threat that they pose.
Yeah, I mean, obviously winning 18 in a row, you're doing something right. So, and going to be in their ballpark, and again, I've never been there, so it's going to be a unique experience to see something different. But we'll see how other teams can handle it, and what the environment is. I think with all these regionals I've been to on the road, especially last year, you just want to try to get out early and get off to a nice 1 or 2-0 lead. And you play with momentum on your side, and I think that's what Florida's going to try to do with all these teams in there. But listen, those guys can throw strikes, and that's the most important thing to me out of anything in a regional, super regional, Omaha. You can't put free guys on base because more often than not, those guys are going to score. And it does look like they throw a lot of strikes and try to keep people off balance, and certainly get a lot of ground balls. And that's the recipe for success, especially in that ballpark that's a little bit smaller. So it should be a fun regional. I think Florida's certainly gone through the grind, as we mentioned that word a couple of times now, of that 30-game SEC season. I think the competition is there. I mean, Florida's seen some of the best players in the entire country. And I guess the question is now for your guys in ECU and even Coastal, does now an SEC team coming in present a different level of competition than what they're used to, facing different types of guys as opposed to some of the smaller mid-major stuff? I think that's the question that's to be determined. But both of those programs have a lot of great history, and certainly they've done it really well for a long time, and both of these huge winning streaks down the stretch. So playing really good baseball, and that's what you need to be doing this time of year.
Great stuff, Jeff. Really appreciate you being so generous with your time as we wrap this up. Kind of a random mention here, but something once I knew that we were going to be having this conversation this morning that I wanted to get in, and that is a clip that went viral on social media. I'm trying to remember if it was last season or a couple years ago, but Jack Caglione, I believe it was against the Georgia Bulldogs of all people, when there was whatever previous events that had happened, and there was a display of emotion. Let's just say that we'll leave it at that. But so the umpire was trying to get things under control in his mind, and then Jack hit a bomb, and just kind of the way he ran to the dugout was tremendous with no show of emotion. I can only imagine your call of that.
Yeah, no, and that's what I think it's all about. It's having fun, enjoying it. We've been doing this for more than 20 years now, so you got to take everything a little lighthearted at times. And yeah, those are the fun times where you get to do it, and especially those rivalry games. I can't stand the Miami Hurricanes. Georgia's a group like that, LSU, so the emotions get a little bit different. But yeah, definitely remember that. Yeah, there was some jawing going back and forth on the field, and umpire said, "You guys can't talk smack anymore." So Cags hit a ball like he always does. It seems like 500 feet, and just got over in, and he wouldn't shake anybody's hand. He put his hands down and his head down, just walked back into the dugout, knowing that he didn't want to celebrate. So the umpire didn't, show everybody up and kind of make it an ump show. And it was just, another great time. But yeah, Cags is great. Certainly it's been fun to watch him, and Gators don't have him this year. You certainly wish they did. He just gets called up to AAA. He's already hit 5 bombs in the first 4 games. So he was a special player, and we'll see if somebody else can duplicate that this year.
Tell Pirate fans or others who may be tuned in, how they can hear your call and your description of things this weekend.
Yeah, sure. There's an app from a local ESPN station here. It's WRUF, so WRUF.com. You can download that app, or ESPN Gainesville, and then there's just a listen live button. That's probably the easiest way if you're out of town to go ahead and enjoy things. So, but yeah, it'll be fun. This was certainly fun, and looking forward to getting up there and making it a fun little regional.
And Pirate Nation, give Jeff a follow on social media. He and Steve Russell, had an excellent show. I believe it was yesterday, also called On Deck. Check that out. We put it on our social media. But again, appreciate the time, Jeff, and maybe we'll see you down in Conway.
Of course, looking forward to it. Take care.
Pirate Nation, that is former Florida Gators pitcher and play-by-play voice Jeff Cardozo. Really appreciate his time this morning as we preview the Conway Regional that features Coastal Carolina, East Carolina, the Florida Gators, and the Fairfield Stags. But that will do it for this edition of the show. Be sure to follow us on social media, as you see there on the screen for our viewers, at Jungle Tales Pod on X, Instagram, and YouTube. But we'll talk to you soon, and as always, go Pirates.